Hey, I'm Stuart from the Central Arkansas Library System, and
I'm
you're
Catherine,
Catherine.
also from the Central Arkansas Library System. Yep,
That's right. This is Two Librarians in Search of an Exit, the Twilight Zone rewatch podcast,
that's right.
where we watch old episodes of the Twilight Zone and discuss them in a modern context
Right.
because it's a crazy world we're living in.
It's true. It's true.
Uh, Today's episode, for your consideration, right? The Obsolete Man.
That's right.
Um, is it season
Season
two?
2, episode 29.
29.
Yep.
229. The Obsolete Man. If you haven't seen it, it's about a librarian who is deemed obsolete by the state.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say which state, but the state.
The state.
And is sentenced to death for the crime of being obsolete. It's like some sort of totalitarian fascist regime that has outlawed books, and so no need for librarians.
It's nuts. What kind of
Yeah.
world, right?
The one of the two main actors in this episode was the lead actor from the previous episode that we discussed, which was Time Enough at Last.
Yep.
Really good actor, but I mean his whole just demeanor and his stature and everything was completely different in this episode, which was fun to see.
Absolutely.
In the last episode, he was very like meek and like kind of hunched and had those huge glasses and everything, and
Right.
didn't look very smart. But in this one, no, man, his eyes were so clear and he was very present.
Yeah, absolutely. He surprised me in this episode. I really loved him in the last one, and I found him weirdly like so different in this episode. He was so like and I mean I thought I would like him more because we talked in the last episode about how he was so timid and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
I don't know, I felt like in the last episode we talked about he also had a real love for books, if you remember, and in this episode I felt like the love was more for the knowledge and access to knowledge and not just the books. And that's great. That's super cool. Just saying it's no Henry Bemis, okay? It's no Henry Bemis. All right.
Well, I have a theory that we can get to later, but first I guess maybe we should do a synopsis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? The episode begins and the librarian, his name is Wordsworth. Romney Wordsworth.
Yep.
Wordsworth. He walks through this very tall door into a dark room. The light is coming in through the door. It's very expressionistic.
Yep.
That's like I think there's a subtle message being sent here. We're supposed to think German, right? Because they had the German expressionist film style was a very stark contrast of light and dark and exaggerated forms. And this door is very tall, and the light that comes through it is very bright in a very dark room. And Romney Wordsworth, he approaches this very like obscenely long table, at the end of which is just a dude sitting, and then there's this very, very, very tall podium where the chancellor stands,
like a pulpit,
almost like a pulpit.
Yeah.
Which I guess in this state,
yeah,
they've the state claims to have disproven the existence of God, and so they worship the state.
Right. So it makes sense.
The state worships itself. Whatever. So yeah, I guess it's appropriate that it would be very much like a pulpit, right?
Yep.
So the chancellor, okay, well, Wordsworth, you're a librarian, you're obsolete because we've outlawed books, and because there's no more books, there's no more need for librarians. So how dare you dedicate your life to something that we've decided has no value, so now you die.
Harsh.
Right. And it's essentially a story told in 3 acts, and the first act is the librarian coming in, being accused of obsolescence, being found by the assemblage there.
They call
people
it the board.
Who are all in the board, right? They're all in these like these gray jumpsuits. They look very homogenous.
Very
Right. I wouldn't quite call them faceless, but it's kind of hard to distinguish one from another.
Right.
And that's probably by design, um, because there's so little to go on in ways of like visual detail because it's so light and dark,
Right.
and they're kind of in the shadows. So they find him to be obsolete. They declare that, and then the chancellor says, "Okay, well, hey, the board has decided that you're obsolete, so now you have to die." And they give Wordsworth um, the right to choose his method of execution.
Right. Crazy.
And there's this really great moment where, like, you see the light bulb.
Yeah.
Like, you can see it in his eyes. Like, oh, he has something cooked up here. Like, he knows what he's going to do.
Yeah.
He says, okay, like, I get to choose, my executioner.
Right.
And only the executioner and me know the way I'm going to die.
Yep.
Also, I want it televised.
Yep.
And the chancellor is really happy about that. Like he's elated at the concept of, oh yeah, we can definitely, we can televise your execution. We're down with that. That's how we roll.
Crazy.
So then I'm sorry.
I said that's crazy.
Yeah, but that's the nature of the people we're dealing with here. So then the second act, we're back in Wordsworth's room, and he's laying on the couch or whatever, just kind of looking a little worried. But then there's a knock at the door. It's the chancellor. Turns out Wordsworth has invited the chancellor, to come to his room. The camera doesn't focus on it exactly, but it's something that's in the background for you to notice if you're looking. But you can see him lock the door. Wordsworth locks the door. No. The chancellor comes through.
Yeah.
And then Wordsworth, he's like looking directly at the chancellor while locking the door.
Huh. Right? I didn't know.
Or maybe like he grabs the key or he locks the something.
Yeah.
And that's important in a second. But then, so, the chancellor's like, yeah, I'm here because, I just want to prove to you that I'm not afraid of you. The state, isn't scared of you. We loathe what you represent and all this nonsense. Yeah. Wordsworth is like, how laughable is that you have to come and like, you're so insecure that you have to come and tell me, a guy who's about to die, that you're not scared of me. I'm just a librarian. You have the power of the state. And you have to come and tell me that you're not afraid of me. Obviously, you're projecting. What an idiot, this kind of thing. But then, so he's about to go, finds out the door is locked. And Wordsworth has chosen to die in an explosion. There's a bomb in his room, along with the cameras that are filming. And the chancellor starts kind of to panic. Yeah. First he thinks like, oh, they're not going to leave me in here. It's televised. Like the state's going to see that I'm stuck in here. They're going to come rescue me because I'm a valued bootlicker. And that doesn't happen. No. So he has to sit down and Wordsworth gets out his Bible and he's quoting different Psalms. And as you pointed out in our pre-show discussion, it's like clocks everywhere and all that. Again, there's clocks. And then, at the very end of that scene, the chancellor says something about, by God, please let me out. And that kind of satisfies the librarian. He says, oh, yeah, sure. God, right. This thing you say you proved doesn't exist. Sure, I'll let you out. Lets him out. The chancellor just kind of like stumbles down the stairs and then the bomb goes off. Our hero is dead. Third act starts. The chancellor walks into the door the way that the librarian had at the beginning of Act 1. Yep. He's gotten himself calm, cool, and collected. His uniform is all, crisp and clean, and he's ready to go back in there to his seat of power, his pulpit. But when he goes in, the table's turned. Mm-hmm. And what a long table it is. But it's turned, and so now he's standing right where the librarian had been. Yep. And he's being accused himself of obsolescence because everybody saw
Yep.
the fear that he displayed, um, the what amounted to his admission of the existence of God,
Oh my.
even though he's
Yeah.
right. Everybody saw it,
Yeah.
and they have to prove that the state, this weakling doesn't represent the state, and so he's obsolete. We have to kill him too, and the aforementioned board.
Yep.
There's this. It's just bonkers watching because they start doing this very like um, literal kind of moan
Uh-huh.
all together while they're just like standing there looking at him, and then they attack him and they drag him down the table, and the chancellor is like, no, 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 I'm not obsolete, I love the state, I want to benefit the state, let me work for the state, and they kill him anyway, and that's the end. And then you see Rod Serling kind of do his summation, and he looks rather pleased with the fate of the chancellor. He's no fan of fascists.
Right. No,
um
either in the show or in real life.
no.
Yeah.
No. So, no tears shed for the chancellor.
No, none at all. Not from me or anybody else.
Nope.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating episode. There were a lot of little things that I noticed that I thought were really interesting. Like when you mentioned the weird, like moaning noise that the board makes. My subtitle said it was a hum.
Ooh, okay.
So I mean, I heard it, and it did definitely sound a little bit more significant than a hum.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also noticed that the new chancellor guy, the guy in the pulpit, had a very robotic tone to his voice, and that's what made me start to think about, like, this in a robotic sense. So that was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned that, and I have this vague recollection maybe that the word robot comes from it's the root of it is Russian maybe, and it has to do with like this concept of like the faceless like worker who has no purpose but working, right? Just serving their purpose without thought or just they're programmed and they do it and that's it, which is kind of appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what those people were doing. I mean, that's what I think they were doing, because there was a scene there at the end where, the original chancellor tries to run in one direction or the other. And you do get a good look at these people's faces. So you do see there's both men and women. They're in all of their clothes look the same because it is a black and white episode, of course, but they're wearing different types of clothes. So like, it's interesting that but at the same time, they're cast in darkness almost all the time, except for this one moment. And so I thought, that's so interesting that, you do get to see some different features on them, but you get it for a split second, and then it's back to this like mob mentality of taking him and throwing him on the table and dragging him down the table and, doing all this crazy stuff. It was very dramatic.
And they are kind of robotic as well. Like, I made a point of really looking at their faces because you didn't really see them very well.
Yeah.
Because they were hidden in the shadows, so when you do get to see them, like, who are these people? And like from here down, there's not a lot of expression.
Yeah.
But their eyes, they look hungry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they can't wait to tear this guy apart.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
And maybe that's like a nationalistic fervor or something that they've got going on. I don't know.
Even just saying that, there's a point in the episode where the chancellor, I believe when he's in Romney, I'm going to call him Rodney at one point.
Okay.
Maybe more than one point, but I mean Romney. Romney, when he's in his room and they're talking right before the explosion goes off, he does mention that their predecessors, whatever, were Nazis and Stalin, Hitler and Stalin. So yeah, Nazi Germany had a lot of that like state pride, Nazi pride fervor.
Nationalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So it would make perfect sense that this is the same kind of thing we're seeing at the end. Um,
And so you bring it to the Nazi point. At the very beginning of the episode, one of the first things I noticed, like I'm not a film scholar, but I know German expressionism when I see it.
right. Yeah.
um, and you know, that's one of the. It's like an obvious thing at the very beginning. You know, just the style of it. You know, the huge, very tall door, the very tall, you know, pulpit kind of thing, the very
Yeah.
long table, and the stark contrast of, you know,
Right.
where the light is and where the dark is. Um, and so like I kind of felt like that was supposed to be, it was a subliminal signal,
Mm-hmm.
like you're supposed to think, oh, these people are like Nazis.
Right. I think
That's what this is.
thinking that you really couldn't. I mean, anyone watching that would think, yeah, definitely. Especially that like the chancellor, the new chancellor, were dressed the same. The guy sitting down with the microphone beneath the pulpit is wearing the same thing. Like they're obviously like meant to represent a military style regime.
But then, you know, later on, like you said, you know, the chancellor comes out and says it, like he's not
Not
hiding anything. He's like, oh yeah, Hitler, you know,
Yeah,
Stalin,
far
all
enough.
right.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, they didn't go far. Like they admire those people, but
Yeah.
they also at the same time kind of despise them because they didn't do enough.
Right. And I mean, he even goes
So
as far as to say like undesirables, old people, sick people.
yeah, they left too many people, and yeah, who were undesirable. They didn't kill enough people.
That's insane. Especially, you know, we always like to talk about how these episodes would resonate with the viewers at the time. And you know, that was not that far in the past there for those people.
Yeah, you're talking like 15 years removed, right?
Yeah.
So something along those lines.
It would have been a very clear visual for them to know like what the Nazis did, and not as if it isn't already still for us today, but for them to have been like, oh my God, like really appalling for someone to say that.
Yeah.
Obviously it still is, just to
I
clarify.
mean, you know, I don't know if you had the same experience. I know you're I would guess about 10 years younger than I am, but when I was in junior high, there were still enough living Holocaust survivors that like there was, I guess there was like a national program where, you know, Holocaust survivors would go and do talks at schools. And even though I lived in this dumb little small town in Arkansas, there was like this lady came and told us like straight up about, you know, the horrors that she witnessed when she was a kid in a concentration camp.
Right. Crazy.
And you know, so I was born in 1982, and I got to go to a school that invited somebody who survived a concentration camp. So it was soon enough after, you know, all of that there were people who were still alive who went through it. And really not, I mean, not that old. I mean, she was probably like in her 60s maybe. And so like to think of like how fresh it was when this episode aired.
Yeah.
You know, not a whole lot of time had passed. I mean, it would be like doing a show about 9/11 like 5 years ago or something. Yeah. You know, or something that alluded to it anyway. It's still just right there on the tip of everybody's tongue.
Yeah, it was really cutting edge, you know, risky business, I think, for Serling to do that and to put that so blatantly in your face. You know, it just goes to show how he was on the cutting edge of like these ideas and these like very, I think I've said it before, it was a very confronting image. He does a lot of this confronting imagery and confronting ideas where you're just kind of forced to look in the face of this idea or something that has to do with the world going on around you. And I just think that's, you know, really a lot of the beauty that he does. Like, I mean, sure, Nazis and crazy, you know, totalitarian governments is not really considered beautiful, but the idea of him putting it together so well is so great.
And, you know, I mean, until recently, it wasn't exactly a controversial viewpoint, right, to you know, not think that Nazis were cool. You know, so it's not like he was really sticking his neck out, but also like, from what I understand, he received letters from people who felt like that episode was critical of the American state.
Right, right. And I think sometimes just like throwing, like even the best intentioned things, putting anything out there that can be politically touchy, it's hard. And, you'll see a lot of directors and producers and creators and writers today do everything in their power to stay away from those topics, to stay on the air, to stay making money, to stay doing things. And so, I tip my hat again, as usual,
right,
to him for being brave and doing that. He was always that way. I mean, he did that with all kinds of stuff. I loved that there was another bomb in this one, not to change but again, with the bombs,
Yeah. And this one got him.
Yeah.
Got him this time, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was interesting. Still, again, just dealing with the times, it was still an issue,
Yeah. But this one, yeah, just a regular old explosive, probably like C4, TNT, dynamite, I don't know, whatever. Rather than like the H bomb from the last episode.
Right.
But so the scene that second act, where they're in Wordsworth's room.
Right.
There's so much great stuff that happens in that act. There was a point where I had to stop and grab my phone, and I had to do a little bit of really quick research, because the chancellor, he was just dripping with this, like, I can only describe it as insecurity.
Yeah, absolutely.
He went in like, he had something to prove, and that has to come from a sense of insecurity, because this man, this librarian Wordsworth, he has no power in this situation. I mean, he kind of does, because he ends up killing the chancellor. But, right. But I mean, he's powerless against the state.
Right.
And you've got the chancellor, who has the power of the state, all of it. I mean, he's the one who sentenced this guy to death in the first place. And so that insecurity kind of made me think of Joseph McCarthy.
Yeah.
And I had to look that, Joseph McCarthy died like 2 years before that episode aired. And I wrote it down. Let me see here. Yeah, the whole, like, the trials that he put people through, that was only like 1954.
Wow, really
so
in time.
Right, and there were still plenty of people who were like vehemently anti-communist. We got to root these people out, kind of attitude. Even though McCarthy was dead, and kind of a joke. I mean, not that he wasn't always a joke, because screw that guy. But that wasn't very far removed, like 5 years since those trials and only 2 years since his death. So that was super, that was right there and very current as well.
Did we mention that that it aired on June 2nd, 1961? I'm not sure.
If was it 61? I was thinking, I was still thinking of 59 from the previous episode that we talked about.
I still think it's very close in time. I mean, it was a huge thing that was going on. It defined a whole, I don't know, it defined a time.
Yeah. I mean, that's still part of the public consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's still, I think it's really interesting that in your research you found that, like, even after his death and even after he was long gone, and the majority of the population thought, well, that guy was crazy, so thank God he's out. There were still people out there who were, concerned about this and that, and concerned about what he was talking about. So that's interesting.
Sure.
Could draw, you could draw some parallels to the world days.
Still plenty of folks who love Richard Nixon. Right.
Yeah. Yes. I think that had to have been some inspiration there. And I definitely think that the chancellor was definitely, like, I felt like he was definitely insecure, and I also was like, he's compensating for something. Like, what is he trying to cover up?
Right.
What within himself is he trying to conceal, and why did he even come here? And then he says that he came there. He even says to Romney, you're probably wondering why I even bothered to come. And then he gives some bullcrap reason about why he came. And I'm like, whatever, you came because you just want to know. Like, you came because you either feel some kind of guilt about what's going on, like something deep inside you is telling you that this is not right, or you're afraid of what this man might be on to, you know what I mean? It also kind of crossed my mind, like, what if he just wanted to come to see like what he's missing out on? What if he wanted to come to see this guy came in front of this whole panel of people, this board of people, and said, I'm a real person. I want my knowledge. I want this
Right.
information. And this chancellor guy's like, well, no, like that can't be allowed. And then he went home and he was like, holy cow, what if that's like a thing that I need? You know, that occurred to me.
That's really insightful, Catherine. Gosh, I hadn't even thought of that, but I mean that could totally be. Yeah, like he's had that seed of doubt planted,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and he has to go and either learn what there is to learn from the librarian,
Mm-hmm.
or have his doubt dispelled.
Right. He needs to know. He has to know.
Prove his own point. He's got
Right.
to, one way or the other. He's got to be satisfied.
Right.
Wow.
He can't go the rest of his life being like that guy. Because I mean, he's probably, if you think about it in the universe that Sterling wants you to live in this episode, he wants you to believe that these people have been living this way for a long time. And that's something I think this episode's really missing. It's a quick moving episode. I mean, there's a lot that you just have to accept in this episode. There's no explanation. You just kind of have to be like, okay, it's this kind of place and it's got this kind of government and they're putting this guy to death. Okay, I got to just like take that information. But if you think about it more critically and you're like, okay, this is not something that happens overnight. This man has probably grown up his whole life being told like truth is a menace, is a direct quote from the show, from this episode. So of course I think that he would want to know, because he's not, a child. He's a grown man. I'm sure he's thought about it.
And so you brought up the quote, truth is a menace. Yeah. And I wrote down in my notes, so Rod Serling in the very beginning, let me see here, like when he's introducing the episode, Rod Serling says, logic is an enemy, truth is a menace, which made me think of 1984, like, what is it, war is peace, right?
Yeah.
War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. And then like who controls the past controls the future.
Right.
All that.
All very scary things.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a literary tie-in, like we've talked about before. Rod Serling really likes to allude to literature, which is great in an episode that's all about a librarian getting the best of a fascist state. So that's another theme that we find. What is this? This is like the third time in a row.
Every episode we've done, we've found
we're not intentionally choosing the ones that are heavy in references to literature. But you found another reference. It was by way of the expressionistic visuals, but there was another literary reference.
Yeah, absolutely. So it talks about how it has that German expressionism, expressionist thing that you were talking about. And there's that film, of course, Fritz Lang is really well known.
Metropolis.
Yeah.
Right.
So again, we have a lot of that same, German expressionist imagery and things like that. Right. And then, so I actually didn't know this, but the 1927's Metropolis is a reimagining of Franz Kafka's 1925 novel, The Trial, which is a really interesting story novel. It actually was a reimagining of a German novel that came out, and it's about this guy who is arrested and charged and I think sentenced to death, and he's not told why, and you never find out why. And it was published after his death, and someone came in and edited it for him and things like that. But again, it brings up that literary, it goes deep. Every episode he has some kind of you can trace his trail kind of back to some kind of short story or pretty unknown German short novel that then was reimagined.
Kafka's got a following, right?
Yeah.
I know I had to read the Metamorphosis in
Yeah.
junior high, high school, one of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, I saw that and recognized it. And then I thought, okay. And then I started looking more into it to understand, because I didn't read the trial. But I wanted to understand what it was about to see if I could draw any parallels. And I definitely could, just in the idea of someone being arrested and sentenced to death for a seemingly unknown or pretty small reason, like being a librarian. But yeah, it came originally from a German book, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, but a German book, novel. That's the word I was looking for.
Das Book.
Yeah, exactly.
Das Book.
I kept wanting to call it a fiction, and I was like, that's not the word that I'm trying to find. But yeah, it really, I love how you can, and I'd be willing to say that the vast majority of episodes you could find some literary tie-in, because he was a reader. We've said that before. He was really into reading, and I think he saw the value in that, and that shows in this episode. It shows in our last episode that we talked about, and like you said, we're not purposely choosing the episodes that glorify books.
Right.
It just, it happens, and we're naturally drawn to that. So
sure. And I mean, Ron Serling is somebody who obviously there's like literature is his bedrock.
Right.
Yeah. It's going to be there, even if it's not super obvious. Even if he doesn't make a clear allusion to a particular work, like there's going to be elements there that you can find if you know what you're looking for. If you also have that bedrock.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Twilight Zone does that. This episode, I mentioned, you can, if you notice it, you can see him like locking the door. Wordsworth locks the door, and the Chancellor can't get out. But you don't have to see it, because later on it's like really obvious the door is locked. Right. And you can just kind of like, you can get that detail when it comes to it, or you can see what he's doing ahead of time, but it doesn't ruin the story for you if you don't see what he's doing ahead of time. And there have been examples like that. There's been like, analogous kind of things in the other two episodes that we've talked about. And I kind of feel like that's intentional now. Like it's becoming it's a pattern that I'm seeing, where you've got these tiny details that you see, or maybe you don't, but then there's it has an obvious counterpart later on,
right?
But there's this thing that you can notice if you're looking for it. Almost like an Easter egg, but not really.
Yeah, because you find out later. But I think that that's what makes these episodes in this show so perfect for looking at the way we're looking at it in an analytical kind of like rewatching kind of ways, like seeing what you can find. Because he is so good at putting these little like extra things in there where you're like, oh man, I've never noticed that before. Like we found with the clocks and the time.
Right.
He really concentrates a lot on time and clocks. And this episode, it was for a different reason, I think. In the last couple of episodes, it's been a lot more about isolation and being alone and loneliness and aloneness and things like that. In this episode, it was more dread, I think. I don't know. I don't think that Romney was dreading his own death. I think that he had won, and he was, pleased with himself. But the verse that he was reading in the Bible, I can't tell you exactly what verse it was. I think you had mentioned it was a Psalm.
Yeah. So it was multiple, pieces of Psalms. Like it was, the 23rd Psalm was the beginning of it. And then it was, chapter 59 verse 2, and then chapter 53 verse 1. He's skipping all over the place. And then it's like 130, like the out of the depths line. That's the 130.
The one that I think is best known is the like though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That's a pretty well-known quote.
Right. I take a look at my wife and realize she's very plain.
Yeah. I don't know that much about it. I just know
that's two leaps, excuse me.
But that led me to believe that him praying and him listening and reading the Bible led me to believe that he was like trying to come to peace with what was about to happen. I don't feel like he was dreading it, but I feel like he was coming to peace with it. And again, that time aspect plays there. It's important there.
Yeah, you're counting down to his death.
Yeah, and I thought, like, you know, those clocks were there, and that's when the light bulb came on, and I was like, time again, like clocks again. What does this mean? Like, what are you trying to tell us with this time? And this time, I think that he was just trying to tell us kind of what you said in the last episode that I thought was so great, and I think it's meaningful in this episode too. Time is either completely irrelevant in these episodes or it's super important. And I think in this episode, it was one of the episodes where it's super important.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that recurring theme.
I think there's a Johnny Cash song where like a guy is counting down to his own execution.
Really? I love Johnny
Yeah.
Cash. Can't believe I don't know that one.
I'll send you a link later.
Okay.
But so something that I noticed at the kind of in the first act, the chancellor, like he's shouting like you're a bug,
Mm-hmm.
and Wordsworth is arguing like his own humanity.
Right.
Like, no, I'm a human being. No, you're a bug, and that's a characteristic of fascists. Like they have to dehumanize their enemies.
Yeah.
Or the people they want to make into the enemies of the state. They have to dehumanize them to make it easier to hate them.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, yeah, he just said it. You're a bug, you know, and we hear that, you know, in modern political speak when we're talking about the other being, you know, infestations or whatever, comparing people to bugs and rats and pests of all sorts. But that's a common thing with fascists. And it reminded me when he's arguing, he's like, no, I'm a human being. I thought of the picket signs that you saw in the civil rights protests that say like, just, I am a man. Mm-hmm. Like that, the most basic assertion, I am a human being.
Right.
And you're arguing with an entity that refuses to acknowledge your own humanity. Like that's the most basic thing.
Yeah.
But and then 1961. I mean, you're right there.
Yep. Absolutely.
You're right there.
There's no way that can't be connected. Absolutely. Yeah. In that same place, he starts talking about. He says something that I really liked. He said, "Words have no substance." The chancellor said, "Words have no substance." Well, that's very funny. You should say that, Chancellor, because you're speaking a lot of words right now that you would really like people to listen. You just don't want people to listen to my words. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then Romney says, "If I speak a thought aloud, it lives." And I was like, so powerful.
Yeah.
That I also related it a lot to like book burning and things like that. If you leave something out there, it lives. And I love
right. Yeah. Was it Ray Bradbury?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't kill ideas.
Right.
That whole sentiment. Yeah.
But I loved how he took it not just for the written word, but for a voice. If I speak a thought, if I speak one thought aloud, it lives. And I loved that. I thought that was super important for, I mean, just spanning the decades, especially then. You know, you mentioned the civil rights movement was going on, and a lot of that was like word of mouth. I mean, obviously they didn't have social media the way that we have it now. They didn't have the communication that we have now. So it really was like one person to another sharing these ideas, sharing these like big ideas.
And the importance of religion.
Right.
You know, and you know, the church as a community hub and spreading those ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good parallel. Let me see. Let me go through my notes because I know there's other stuff.
I have a few more quotes that I really liked.
Go for it. Yeah.
He said, the chancellor said, "You're obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth. You have no function. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time." And I thought, that sounds so familiar when people are like, "You work at a library? What are you, like 90?" I'm like, kinda.
Yeah, no, and well, in that first act when he steps into the room,
yeah,
and they say, you know, what is your occupation? And he says, "I'm a librarian."
Proudly.
The board laughs.
Yes.
Like I've gotten that reaction. Like, I mean, from people who like say, you know, knew me when I was younger, and versus like the perception of what a librarian is supposed to be.
Oh yeah, I walked in with the tattoos, and I'm like, yeah, I work with teens, and people are like, what?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a huge misconception about what libraries are and what they do. And also, the people laughing, my immediate thought was like, well, wait until you need something. Like when you need something, where do you go?
Yeah.
You go to these institutions that can provide that for you. And it's a privilege thing, I think, too. And it's a, you don't know you need it until you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. To think that you are immune to needing that piece of public infrastructure is absolutely privileged. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there are so many people who it's built into their survival plan day to day.
Yeah. I mean, hundreds of people that I see every day at the library
Yeah.
that's built in. Gosh, I just had a really great thought too, and it just left me about people being in a library and just how it's just to go over it again. It's such a great place. It's such an important place.
But there's maybe some symbolism there, and I know that like the lighting and the way it's used is supposed to allude to like a particular like film movement. But the librarian like walks into this dark room, the door is open, and the light comes in, and he's the light is coming with him.
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And into the darkness of obvious ignorance, because what else could a fascist state be built on?
Right. What about the silhouette? I mean, the light, it was lit up from behind him, so that lead to like people who are working these jobs that people don't always think about being kind of faceless sometimes. You couldn't really see a lot about him until he really got into the room. Could that be something going on there? I don't know.
Sure, yeah. Which you could then have the conversation about how much or how little libraries and library workers in particular are valued, and how incongruent that can be with their actual like demonstrated and practical worth. I think that libraries, there's theory and there's practice, and in practice, libraries were used as a band-aid,
yeah,
in a lot of ways, to compensate for the failures of the state.
Yep.
You've got entire populations of people who do not have a home to sleep in. The library gives them a place to be.
Yep.
So they don't freeze to death, right? You've got entire populations of people who do not have access to the technology that they need to exist in the modern world. The library is a band-aid for that.
Yep.
You've got people who are failed by the also underfunded public education system, grow up not knowing how to functionally like read.
Right.
The library gives them a place to learn how to do that.
Absolutely.
And it's for a state that fails so many people to then also fail to value the institution that allows them to keep on in their ineptitude.
Absolutely.
Anyways,
not to mention the teens and kids that we feed every day, hundreds and hundreds of kids and teens that we feed, literally food, right. Meals, like a basic necessity of life. And not to go on and on about how great libraries are, which we both could for forever. But just to share a quick, thing about libraries and the purpose that they serve that you might not think of. We had a patron once who was a homeless patron and had a problem with a tooth, and literally asked us what it looked like because he had no mirror to look in. And I remember being like, the library is providing you a mirror to look at yourself. And then I thought about all the times I look in a mirror every day, which makes me sound really bad, but you do, just to like live in your
they're everywhere.
Yeah. Or like brushing your teeth in the morning, like leaving your house, getting in your car, looking in the rear, like so many places you could see yourself, and this guy literally had like a tooth swollen out to here and was like, does it look bad? Because he hadn't seen himself in weeks probably, and so it's crazy the things that the library provides, and it's crazy how this episode just spends a portion of it talks about so much, but that portion of it being so important, and maybe it's just important to us and the people who love the library, but it was blaringly obvious, that point, that people don't appreciate these institutions until they need them.
Yeah, so that one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this conversation was this absolute doofus who wrote an article. I don't know, I guess it was a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's been that long. Like, time means nothing anymore.
Right.
So who knows when it was. But he wrote this article for the Forbes website, Forbes.com. And the premise of the article was, hey guys, libraries are obsolete. Why don't we replace them with brick and mortar Amazon stores where people can buy their books, and we can just save tons of taxpayer money, which is ignorant on so many different levels. And luckily, because libraries and librarians are on Twitter, this guy was ripped a new one.
Yep.
Because of how ignorant and wrong he was. Because like the amount of money that goes into libraries is constantly shrinking, and negligible when you compare it to the amount of money that we give to companies like Amazon.
Yep.
Compared with the value that a community gets from having a library.
Absolutely.
You really can't make that comparison, because there's the economic stimulus of having, okay, yeah, you're selling things in an Amazon store, but then Amazon's not going to feed children.
No.
Amazon's not going to teach you how to read. Amazon does not care.
Right. And
Bezos does not care about you as a person.
No. And those people that are using the library in the first place are not on Amazon. I would say more than half, more than 75% of the people that are regularly, like every day, coming in that building and using it on a regular basis, and our bread and butter patrons, are not spending their money on Amazon.
Or maybe it's like a backup. Like if you just really, really want to read the new James Patterson, but you weren't lucky enough to be one of the first 100 people to place a hold.
Right, absolutely.
Like, oh, well, I guess I got to get it on my Kindle.
Yeah, and I mean, but I would really venture to say that more than half of the people that I meet on a daily basis, and that may be just that I'm on the teen floor and I'm meeting these kids who don't have the financial means at home to have Netflix, to have dinner at home. Their parents are not buying things on Amazon. Their parents are barely able to get by on a bus pass. I mean, they're struggling to buy bus passes. You know what I mean? So articles like this show really the disconnect between I don't want to say the 1%, because I'm sure this guy's not maybe part of the 1%, but people who are financially stable being set apart from people who are not, and not realizing how close they may be to being in that person's shoes, who is like, well, it's almost 4:00. I got to go up to the library so I can get my kid a dinner. You can tell that the person who wrote this article has never been in that situation, or thinks that they never will.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of a more famous Romney who said, corporations are people, my friend.
Absolutely.
But they're not. Libraries are people. Like, libraries are a connection to humanity.
That's right.
And corporations are not.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, libraries, man, they save the world. They really do. You can ask kids that come into my department. They'll tell you that the library has done something for them. And
at the same time, the library is not inherently infallible, right? I mean, we do have to. There's a notion in librarianship it's relatively new. There's a librarian on the East Coast, her name's Obasi. Right? She coined this term called vocational awe. that some librarians tend to fall into, thinking that the library is an institution can do no wrong.
Right.
When, I mean, like, because we are human, of course
Right.
we can do wrong. But it's almost like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm.
Yeah.
Like, we don't walk into situations like wanting to just, like, break stuff and cause people harm.
Right.
There's always that presumption of um, benevolence.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I would also say that the library, and I feel this way too about certain people that come into the library that love the library so much, and we love to see that. But you also have to think, like, the library, and especially, like, a lot of library systems around the country are so large, and it's made up of so many people, and you can't, it's like those schools of fish in the ocean that, like, they're tiny little fish, but there's so many of them. They're just these huge bodies that move around and do things. And so, I think that, just like you said, like, libraries are people, and it's the people that are important. It's you want to have good-hearted people doing that. And luckily, a lot of people who work in libraries are good-hearted people that want to do good and want to help, and want to do their best.
And, imagine if there were fewer people in the world who thought like this dork, who wants to replace public libraries with Amazon stores, and more people who wanted to adequately and permanently fund not just public libraries, but all public institutions.
Yeah.
Imagine what public libraries could do with full funding, and never having to worry about where the money was going to come from. Like, we've been doing so much with so little for so many people for so long.
Yep.
Like, if we had enough money, what would we do? Right.
Take over the world.
I mean,
I think that
lost for kings.
Yeah, but I genuinely think that public institutions are the things that really make the world go round. You know what I mean? Because there's just not that many people out there that have just never been in a situation where they're like, well, how am I going to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's just, everybody that I've ever met almost has been like, yeah, there was a time in my life where I just really needed some help, and I got it, or I didn't get it, and I'm and so I just don't know how you can, like, look at that large a number of people that have been, like, all of these personal experiences of people that have, like, used these institutions, and not just libraries, but like healthcare institutions, free clinics, women's clinics, post offices, things like that, that, like, serve this huge purpose, and you're like, they're fine. I just don't.
Or that we can get along without them.
Right. Or that we can get along without them. We cannot. It won't. We really can't. And that's how you end up living in this crazy world that we're talking about in this episode.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
There's okay. Well, I've got two more things, but one is an actual thought of drawing a parallel between this episode and something, like, I was reminded of, speaking of librarians in opposition to the state, there was, in our world at least, there was this famous instance where a library was, I guess, the government demanded some certain records from a particular library using the Patriot Act, claiming that they had the authority to demand records of what certain patrons were checking out. And that was an issue for a long time in libraries in the in the early part of that decade, the 2000s.
Wow.
Whether we would tell them to take a hike or give them what they're asking for. But there was one library that the Fed showed up and said, tell us what person A is checking out, what they're reading. Ugh. And the library said, nah. And they weren't even legally allowed to talk about it. They couldn't even tell the public what was going on, that the federal government was attempting to violate their privacy in this sacred institution where privacy is one of the guiding principles.
Right.
They couldn't even talk
Golden
about
rule,
it. Yeah, right. But anyway, so my last thing, and it doesn't have to be the last thing, but it's the very last thing that I felt like I really wanted to talk about. I have a theory
Okay.
regarding the Twilight Zone
Mhm.
as it pertains to Henry Bemis.
Okay, I love Henry Bemis.
Okay, right. So, when we last see Henry Bemis, he's, Rod Serling would say he's in the Twilight Zone. He's standing on the steps of a public library that's in ruins.
Right.
With books that are in immaculate shape, nonetheless.
I see where this
His
is going.
glasses, right? His glasses have broken,
right?
And we see him in this moment of irony and hopelessness. But then, okay, here's Wordsworth,
Yeah,
which sounds like a made-up name.
It does.
Wordsworth. What if Henry Bemis?
I love it.
He's in the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
What if he's stumbling around, he can't see, and you brought up David Lynch before.
Yes.
And I think I told you, like, one of my favorite movie soundtracks of all time is Lost Highway.
Yeah.
That's a movie where somebody literally wakes up and they're a different person. That happens in David Lynch, stories. But
right.
Henry Bemis, let's say he stumbles through the wrong door.
Yeah.
And he winds up in some kind of weird parallel fascist America. I'm guessing it's America because they don't have like British accents or anything. And he becomes a librarian.
I hope so.
I mean, he gets like, LASIK or something. His eyes work, suddenly.
Yeah.
And he gets a sense of confidence, but he's finally in the right line of work at least.
Yeah. Well, I think spending some time in the Twilight Zone, you never know what can happen. He could have just, like you said, fallen through the wrong door and ended up here. And I love the idea. I love it. Thinking about him being like this, like gung-ho, like, I'm a librarian. I'm going to do whatever I want. Like, I love it. And I love Henry Bemis. And I didn't love this guy quite as much. I did love him, but it was such a quick thing. It was such a quick episode. Yeah. You didn't really get a chance to get to know him.
And he can be a little preachy too.
Yeah.
Honestly.
You're right. But I love that theory. I love the idea about him. And it would give some closure to that character that we didn't have any closure for.
Right. That was kind of like our parting thought last time was, what happens to Henry Bemis? Because, we don't see it. It's not on camera. It's not part of the story. That's, his glasses break and he's hopeless and that's the end.
Right.
But, what if he
got blown up and he took a fascist person and he like took him with him kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. And wouldn't that be an interesting, like full circle kind of thing for a character to have survived an H-bomb, but then end up in a parallel world where they become a librarian.
Finally.
And then they're blown up by a smaller bomb.
I love it. I want to believe that that's what happened.
Okay.
I'm going to believe that.
So now we know what happened to Henry Bemis.
Yes.
He accidentally ends up in another area of the Twilight Zone, assumes another identity, gets his eyes fixed so he doesn't have the glasses problem again.
Right.
Because, lesson learned. And then he shows on, national television how weak these insecure jerks are.
Absolutely. I love it. I love everything about that.
Cool.
Let me see. I have some other things here too. Did you know that in this episode, the end narration was actually shortened before it aired? So it originally was much longer.
It was already pretty poignant.
Yeah, and that's what I thought too. But then when I found out that it actually had been shortened before it aired, I went and looked for the original, and this is what the original said. I'm gonna skip the beginning and end. So wait, okay, I'll read them both. How about that? I'll read.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
so the original, the one that aired said the chancellor, the late chancellor, was only partly correct. He was obsolete. But so is the state, the entity he worshipped. Any state, any entity, any ideology which fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for mankind in the Twilight Zone. That was the one that aired. Very interesting. Very like, oh wow, you know. Imagine that in Rod Serling's voice.
Oh yeah.
Better.
And you can see his face too. Like
Yeah.
you can tell like he kind of has this. It's not necessarily delight, but he's like I said, like he's not shedding any tears over the
Right.
chancellor.
All right. Well, the longer one adds this really great part in the middle that I loved. So I'm going to read that.
Okay.
It says, the chancellor, the late chancellor, was only partly correct. He was obsolete. So is the state, the entity he worshipped. Any state, entity, ideology becomes obsolete when it stockpiles the wrong weapons, when it captures territories but not minds, when it enslaves millions but convinces nobody, when it is naked yet puts on armor and calls it faith, when while in the eyes of God, it has no faith at all. Any state, any entity, any ideology which fails to recognize the worth, dignity, rights of man, that state is obsolete. I love saying it enslaves millions but convinces nobody. I love it. I think it totally speaks to so many times, including our own sometimes.
Right.
You know, I think there are lots of people who hear things maybe in the news, maybe just out there, you know, rumors. There's been a lot of rumors about this pandemic going on. A lot of like false information has been put out there. It's just crazy. Enslaves millions but convinces nobody. That's crazy. Such a good statement, I thought.
Thanks, Rod.
Yeah, and like speaks to what he really thought, you know. I wonder if they really took it out because it was too long, or if they took it out because it was like 1961 and he was calling people out. He was like saying, you know, really what he thought about the situation.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a little too late to be talking to Hitler,
Right.
and it's not like he's talking to Stalin,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Who's he talking to?
Yeah.
He's talking to, the brethren of Joseph McCarthy. He's talking to, people who want to travel in that direction, in his own state.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that is so interesting. So yeah, I think that was all I had as well. I thought this was such a great episode.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't know just how poignant it was going to be when I chose this one last week, but it's pretty close to home.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, libraries. I think that, you know, my prediction for the future with libraries, I think that they're going to be around. I think that there's too many people in our community, and this isn't the only library that I've worked for. I also worked for the Cabot Library for a while, and I grew up in Cabot and here in Arkansas, in case no one knew. Yeah, you know, it was a community that people needed their library, and they loved their library, and you know, I don't think it's going anywhere. And I just like other public institutions get the attention and the funds and everything that they deserve because they're important.
I mean, it's the unfortunate truth is that we have political movements in our country that are built around intentionally, maliciously defunding public institutions. Like the Koch brothers meddled in a local election in a small town in Arkansas to get the people of, I think it was Clinton. It was Clinton, Arkansas, a little bit north of Conway, kind of between Conway and like Leslie and Marshall, that area.
Okay.
To vote against funding their library. Like they wanted to, get the taxpayers to approve some more money so that they could hire a person with an MLS degree to head their library.
Yeah.
Which, you kind of have to have that in Arkansas. And the Koch brothers were able to pump enough money into that election to get them to vote against it. And I was like, what do you guys have? Like, what is your dog in this fight? You know?
Right.
Why is this where you have this amazing amount of wealth and power, and this is what you do with it. You mess with a small town Arkansas library,
Right.
right? And it's unfortunate that that's the political reality that we're in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you cannot walk into a modern American public library or public library anywhere in the world, because there are libraries in like refugee camps, right?
Yeah.
You cannot walk into a modern public library and deny what it's there for and who it's there for.
Yeah.
No matter how much you may want them to not exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's too many people who rely upon and do support public libraries, and I'm glad that that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I would tell, if I were to tell someone who, truly didn't think that public libraries were a necessity in communities and didn't think that libraries built communities and maintained communities, I would ask them to come and spend a day. Come and spend the day. Just sit in the coffee shop, sit in the, children's department if you're allowed. Yeah. I don't really know, kind of depends. But, come and spend some time in that area and just sit there and watch what happens. Because it really only takes a couple hours. I mean, an hour sitting. And you'll see just how important they are. And I also wanted to ask you, do you think that the reason, you mentioned that election and how people, what was their point? Why would they do that? Do you think that, my first thought when I think about that is about the social disconnect, the financial disconnect between the people who have these like expendable income, they have, definitely like in the middle class type thing. Do you think that that would be directly related to they just don't understand? They've never been in that position?
That could be,
or do you think it's just, they just truly just only care about themselves? Is that too deep a question?
I don't think it's too deep a question. I think that they're related.
Yeah.
Not having been in a position where you needed that public infrastructure as a matter of survival lends itself to not appropriately valuing that infrastructure.
Right.
And what it does for people, just because you don't have that personal experience. And if you live in some kind of bubble where you don't interact with people who do benefit directly from that public infrastructure, then you are ignorant of its importance. That's just how it is. But you're right. Yeah, come to the library, see what it does, and it'll be interesting to see. Like, we know what the library looked like before.
Yeah.
And our coworker, Roslyn Elliott, wrote this really great blog article recently for the Central Arkansas Library System website about the library being closed, and it's very dark, and her emotions about that. And it was really poignant. So we know what it looks like now. We don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow.
Right.
There are in every part of the world that this virus is affecting, because of the economic repercussions, there are a lot of libraries where they're just closing outright, or library workers are being asked to take on tasks that are outside of their normal range of duties. Some are being furloughed and laid off. There's going to be this huge amount of flux in our line of work, and I think that we have an opportunity in the midst of all this change to choose our own redefinition.
Absolutely. I love that.
Those of us who are left, we can invite back the ones who had, who were let go. And we can redefine librarianship for a new era, one that is intentionally built around being inclusive, and intentionally built around just bringing as many people as possible in, and encouraging everyone to acknowledge our collective humanity as well as the humanity of individuals.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is definitely true. I think we will see a whole new population of people who maybe lost their job or we're in a situation that they've never been in before, that'll be knocking on our door coming in. And it's so important. I love that you mentioned inclusion, because it's so important to not look at these people as like, you know, a population who didn't love the library. And so, you know, you can't really use a library. Like, no, absolutely. We want you here. You know, my job is part of my job is outreach. And I find myself often convincing people why they should come to the library. And it's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm really looking forward to meeting all these new people.
And we're definitely going to have an opportunity to do that, because there's such an economic mess that we're going to have to deal with. And the main library of the Central Arkansas library system right now, even though the building is closed to the public, there's construction happening on the 5th floor.
Yep.
This entrepreneurial hub that's going to be put in. There's going to be classes. There's going to be all kinds of resources for people who are trying to start their own business. You know, kind of, you know, furthering their side hustle, or creating their own long-term financial success.
Right. Absolutely.
And then there are going to be a lot of people who will need that resource, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw it the other day. I was working curbside service, and I was up there, and it looks super cool and like totally different than it did before. So I'm excited to hear our regular patrons as well talk about how different it looks.
Yeah, and not to turn this into a commercial for the entrepreneurial resources of the Central Arkansas Library System, but you know, we got them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's great. Let's talk about the next episode. So I think the next one we're going to do is called The Shelter.
The Shelter.
Yeah. It's about a neighborhood of people are threatened by a bomb. I believe it's a nuclear bomb. Again with the bombs. It's a great episode, though. It's a great episode. So they're threatened by a nuclear bomb, and there is one family that has a bomb shelter built under their house. If you remember, like back in like the 50s. I'm almost certain that this episode was definitely aired around the same time this episode that we've talked about today in the 60s. I'm almost sure. Don't quote me on that, but I'm almost sure it was aired in the 60s, but I think it's meant to be set earlier than that. I think it's meant to be set in like the nuclear war era, 50s and stuff like that.
Okay.
Anyway, there's this one family that has a bomb shelter, and they kind of have to make these tough decisions about who is going to be allowed into the shelter. Will they leave food for people? What are they going to do? These are people that they love and care about.
Wow. So, there's going to be issues that center around community and society, obviously, how people react to emergency situations.
Yeah.
As it pertains to, you know, the people in their communities, and privilege, and who deserves to live through a crisis and who doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It sounds like they're making that decision, like who lives and who dies, literally based on the privilege of who has a shelter and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that'll be really interesting to talk about. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone who's been watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. We will see you guys next week. Bye.
Yeah, join us. Bye.